one more thing before I cut you guys loose. And again, apologies that it's a little abbreviated today. So yesterday we were talking about my thought experiment and my thesis on how we had the milk carton kids in the 80s and the stranger danger and all of that, and how that helped move kids indoors at the same time that video gaming and the internet was starting to take hold. So now we've got all these kids indoors, they're on the internet, and it opens them up to this pathway for predators, right? So I continued with that thought experiment a little more and gathered up some data. And I asked myself this question, and I want you guys to think about it. And you can let me know what you think when we're done here. Would you rather have your kid walk home alone, or would you rather let them have private messaging? So DMs. So access to DMs or the ability to walk home alone. So let's go through the data. And we'll start playing with side A of that, and that's letting them walk home alone. And I would argue that there's a real risk in letting your child walk home alone, but it's not in the stranger abduction area. It's in traffic. In 2023, 171 child pedestrians, so age 14 and under, were killed, and just over 7,000 were injured in pedestrian traffic crashes. So there's some danger there. If your child's under 14 and they're walking around, you know, when you consider the amount of children in the United States, is it a huge risk? No, but it is present. It can happen. And those deaths tend to cluster right around when kids are out and about. The highest share of those deaths occur between 3 and 6 p.m. and between 6 and 9 p.m., which are kind of the classic after school and after school activity hours. So when school is over and when the extracurriculars like sports and stuff are over, that's when these things tend to happen. So there is a real risk there. But what about the abduction end of things? So that's the traffic where there is real danger. But non-family abductions are the rarest category according to NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. It only makes up about 1%. So 99% of the cases, the abductor of the child is somebody who is known to the child, usually a family member, sometimes a friend. The worst case abducted and murdered scenario, when it happens, it moves quickly. This is FBI data. They say that 74% of abducted and murdered children were killed within 3 hours and 90% within 24 hours. So when something happens where there's an abduction and there's an intent to murder, it happens very, very fast. So unless you get on it like immediately, there's not much you're unfortunately going to be able to do about it. But it supports this point. The fear is huge because if something happens, it's so quick to go south, but the frequency is very low. So it's horrible, but not overly common. But I will say there is a broader street risk. In 2024, 1.95%, just under 2% of children aged 12 to 17 reported at least one violent victimization while walking out on the streets. Now, that's a very vague term, and it wasn't overly well defined, so what do you count as violent can be debated, but 2% of the kids walking around out there, you know, it could be something as simple as somebody throwing a snowball at them, which we found out in the state of Wisconsin is like a Class B felony or something like that now. So something to bear in mind. But in the pro-walk argument, the most measurable danger is the cars. It's not the creeps. And it can probably be mitigated with the routes that the children would walk. Are they walking in groups? Are they paying attention at crossings? Stuff like that. So that's side A of that argument. Now, side B, talking about private messaging. NCMEC, the cyber tip line there, reported that in 2024, it received 546,000 reports of online enticement. That is up 192% from the prior year. So if you thought it was bad, in 1 year, it got way worse. They define online enticement as adults communicating with a child for sexual purposes, and it includes sextortion. NCMEC also reported nearly 100 reports per day of financial sextortion in 2024. And since 2021, they're aware of more than 36 teenage boys who committed suicide directly from being a victim of sextortion. So there is something there for sure. To give you a little bit of scale context, the cyber tip line there received 20.5 million reports in 2024. And NCMEC notes the problem is globally distributed. A large share of it comes from outside of the United States. So it's not just U.S. citizens who are going after U.S. children. But if you look at the whole thing globally coming into the United States, 24.5 million reports. So the FBI describes financially motivated sextortion patterns. Offenders often pose as peers, pressure teens into explicit images, and then demand money. They've also issued notices to banks about financially motivated sextortion as increasing threat, so they're trying to get the banks to monitor for clues of this happening. But bottom line is, walking home exposes your kid to a random risk, but if they have access to DMs and private communications and stuff like that on the internet, it exposes them to a targeted risk. It makes them a target as opposed to more likely a victim of random incident, like a car accident. However, there is some pro-messaging data. NCMEC also reports that 68 children were rescued in 2024 due to Amber Alert activation, and that happened real quick because of all the cell phones around. So if children have cell phones, they're getting these Amber Alerts, and they can say, oh, that's Johnny. I just saw Johnny over there. So there's a positive for it there. Research from NCMEC also shows that parents widely use digital location traffic, which can enable more independence while still being able to allow you to track your child. So there's that benefit. So you can say that a kid with a phone can call for help. They can share their location. They can coordinate rides. It's a safety tool if you leave them out of direct messaging. So those would be kind of the arguments for and against the idea of, is it better to have them walk alone with a phone, or walk home alone rather, or to have them be supervised outside but have a cell phone? So real quick before we go, put a 1 in the chat if you think they'd be better to just walk home alone, or 2 in the chat if you think they should be supervised outside but have access to a phone. I mean, which would you rather see them have? The ability to walk or the ability to have a phone? If you could only choose one. For me, I think you let them walk home. You know, somehow I survived my childhood without a cell phone, but being able to go outside and play. I'm just saying. But think about that today as you're going about your business, and mull it over. You would go with 3, blending of both. Wahoo. Yeah, I mean, I put the argument out there if you could only pick one, but in a perfect world, sure. Maybe it's, I would say maybe it's a flip phone, but those aren't going to have the tracking capabilities. So I don't know if that's the answer either. But that's the problem, is if you give the child the technology, how do you 100% keep them out of these danger areas? And you don't. But I suppose you could make the argument that it probably comes down to teaching them how to handle things, much like you teach your child how to watch for cars and cross the road and stuff like that. Though I would say if you're talking about how to navigate the roadways, it's a lot more black and white. It's a lot more rules-based than it is if you're trying to teach them how to navigate and stay safe online, which involves a lot more trickery. You know, there's not as much trickery out on the road with somebody going, haha, I'm going to trick this kid and then I'm going to hit him with my car. No, it's an accident, where there's a lot more deceit and deception that goes into the online risk. So there's that. All right, let me catch up on your thoughts before we call it here. Things are kind of weird these days, and it's a lot harder to understand risk. You know, that's very true, Charles. It is very hard to understand risk, which is, I suppose, an argument that the world has gotten way too complicated. There's a push, especially in Gen Z right now, towards simpler things and simpler times. And these are probably some of the reasons why. It's too complicated. You can't figure out how to navigate it. You know, it doesn't make any sense. And it's probably going to be the end of us if we keep down this road. So I get why Gen Z especially is pushing towards simpler times and older days and all of that. It makes sense to me. Barbara says even parental controls aren't guaranteed. I totally agree with you. So anyways, I just wanted to share that with you. I took the thought pattern from yesterday and advanced it a little further into a what would I rather have. And for me, you know, there's a phrase that I use throughout my life, and I'd encourage you to consider it. And that's that living causes death every time it's tried. And it's very true. You know, there's risk in everything. We're all eventually going to leave this planet and leave this life. So at some point, you have to accept the fact that every day could be your last. Every day could be the last for those that you love. And you just have to live a little bit. And that would, I suppose, be my argument when it comes back to the 80s and the 90s that we talked about yesterday, as we went through the milk carton kids into the stranger danger and all of that. And we developed this fear that, oh my goodness, our kids are going to die, so let's move them all inside. I don't know that it helped us any. I mean, it's sad when stuff happens, especially to a child. It's sad when they leave the world so young, but there's always a risk to everything. And there has to be something said for just living. So I'll leave it at that. Hey, thanks for watching this clip from TCF Overtime, the fourth hour of our daily live show where we discuss the happenings of the court that we saw during the day and other law news. If you like this video, please do leave it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Leave us a comment, let us know what you thought. You can join us live every weekday morning, 9 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Pacific, right here on this channel.